trying to get the screen sharing working there, but down. There's that working?
Yep, I see it.
All right. Hi. So I'm Matthew Vimislick, aka Vimi, and I've been a working artist for a decade, illustrating for books, magazines, but mostly tons and tons of web and mobile games. But I'm most proud of my visual novels, notably Romancing Flesh, which won third place overall at the last Booktober VN Jam, as well as Best Monster and Best Cinematography, and King of the Cul-de-Sac, which is featured on the Ren'Py homepage because it, quote, makes great uses of Ren'Py's animation language and interactivity. Really does. So with all my experience and expertise, I want to make a declaration loudly and to the heavens. The opening to Nekapara is pretty good, you guys. At the start of Nekapara, you're opening a bakery, and when you enter the shop, there are two large, mysterious boxes waiting for you. And as you're reading the warning labels, one of them sneezes. There are cat girls in these boxes. This is not a mystery. But what did intrigue me is that in most VNs, I tend to click on the dialogue boxes to proceed. But here, I found myself clicking on the cardboard boxes. Now, maybe this was years of loot box mechanics training me to click on boxes, but I think this was a case where I was more interested in what was viscerally changing in the scene versus what was changing in the dialogue box. Abby Howard's Scarlet Hollow also places a lot of emphasis on how things in the scene can change, training you early on to anticipate and be fearful of what could emerge from the negative space. Even mundane conversations about YouTuber revenue have an undertone of something scary is about to happen, driven by the deliberate use of darkness and negative space. Here, you don't even need to change what happens in the scene to make it compositionally engaging with every click. You just need the threat of what could change. Now, these two previous examples used custom CGs or more complicated assets than the standard character sprites and backgrounds. So instead, I want to focus on utilizing cinematic techniques to take assets you may already have in your visual novels and how to arrange, move, and present them to make stories that are told by your visuals as much as or more than your words. Boop. Basically, we'll look at ways to stage and frame the characters in your scenes. For now, we'll define staging as how you place the characters relative to each other. And boop, 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 boop. Sorry, I'm like getting distracted by the chat now because it's going by really fast. So we'll define staging as how you place the characters relative to each other, and framing as how you place the camera relative to the characters. So let's focus on how these different cinematic techniques can give complexity to a simple conversation between two characters. The example here shows two characters a reasonable distance apart, but by staging them farther away, we can make them seem emotionally distant, or we can make them seem like a cohesive duo by staging them together. Now, normally you may have two characters facing each other to talk, but by changing the direction, how the direction is staged, you can make them seem disinterested in the conversation between them, or at least more interested in what they're facing together. Staging the direction they move across the scene is important as well. Moving left to right feels like you're making progress since it has a more natural flow, while moving right to left can feel difficult, like you're moving against resistance. My film professor said this is mostly a Western convention since we read from left to right. But honestly, the platformer has kind of cemented this staging convention across like all games. For framing, how closely we see the characters in frame makes a huge difference. There are absolutely tons of different types of shots that have a variety of uses, but in context of a conversation, a full shot makes the conversation seem very casual. A medium shot makes it seem like a personal conversation, while a close-up makes the conversation seem secretive or intimate. Negative space is how we handle characters' positioning in relation to the environment. If you put the characters in the middle of the screen, the emphasis is on the characters. Put more space in the direction they're facing or moving towards, then you're emphasizing what the characters can see, some sort of planned, foreseeable events or things off screen that the characters are aware of. Put more space behind the characters, then the emphasis is on what the characters can't or won't see. This sort of shot is used to give a sense of foreboding. You can also choose not to frame certain things. Moving the camera from a character's face can put you at an emotional distance or make you focus on the nonverbal communicative elements of a character's sprite. And of course, you can change how you frame the image entirely. Different ways of physically framing the characters in a scene by changing the border shape and frame dimensions can give you a variety of different tones and feels. This is a big thing that like comics and manga have known for a really long time, and film, especially like in the 1960s, like French New Wave, like you'll see a lot of examples of that. Now keep in mind, these are not rules, these are tools. Context is king, and you're almost never showing characters in front of a void without context like I am. So keep in mind how color choice, backgrounds, and mixing and matching these staging and framing decisions will work in your scenes. So for example, let's combine these techniques to visually show a conversation between two characters. We'll start with two characters using a full shot on them centered to emphasize their close proximity. We cut to a medium shot. The conversation is getting more personal, and we've put more space behind them. We're unsure what direction this conversation is heading. One character has gotten much closer to the other one. She's trying to progress towards something, while the other character is not. They're closer, but it feels uncomfortable. Here, the purple character is obscured, while the green one has a close-up, putting focus on them. The green character is still positioned in a way that suggests uncertainty, but in this shot, the purple character is centered and close up, so the emphasis on what they're definitively stating right now. Now, the characters' proximities are so far apart, they aren't even on the same screen together. We can see that whatever the purple character just said has created distance between them. Both forward blocking and the characters facing each other, they're being clear and direct with each other. It's an honest conversation, but not a friendly one. With this custom framing in the middle, we can literally show the divide that has appeared between the characters. And it even allows us to change the framing for each character separately. A tighter close-up to the green character shows that this is a far more personal issue for her than for the purple character. Now we can see the physical distance between the characters, but we're still emphasizing that emotional distance through obscuring their faces. It may have been a personal, emotionally fraught conversation before, but now it's a cold decision that they should be apart. And now through the spotlight framing, we can emphasize this entire conversation is left to the purple character alone. So even without words, we can get a clear sense of the relationship dynamics at play through this conversation. And this was all done with just two static silhouettes. I want to really emphasize that. No changes in poses or anything. So two static silhouettes and just creative framing. Combine these with expression changes, color tints, and maybe even some light animation, and this simple conversation can have the dynamism of an animated cutscene, but at a fraction of the production costs. Now, I barely scratched the surface in terms of cinematic staging, framing, and composition. There's really, we have literally over 100 years of lessons to learn. So I suggest you check out some Film 101 courses, or at the very least, check out some film appreciation YouTube channels that I put here that put an emphasis on the craft of storytelling. Don't worry so much about critics and stuff. Just, links, I need links, Nye. Just look them up, man. But there's another way we can use cinematic language that's unique to how we handle digital literature. The 2020 visual novel Necrobarista did a lot of amazing things, and boy, howdy, we can talk about it for a while. But what makes it important to me is how it threw away the standard dialogue box that so many visual novels have. Look at how your eye moves across these screens from line to line. Versus those same lines put in a dialogue box at the bottom. Dynamic text versus static text is a big cost versus benefit thing, but I'd argue you don't need to use it all the time, just when you want to take advantage of the benefits that dynamic text can offer. But we don't just want dynamic text for the sake of moving your eye around. Remember all those cinematography techniques we learned earlier? And most of my presentation there. Let's use the same techniques, but this time, text is a character. Text closer to the character's mouth is more intimate and truthful than text farther away. Text that moves left to right and or downward feels more progressive and natural than text that moves upward or from right to left. Text that's displayed smaller and closer together reads as a more cohesive block of text, but it feels less intimate, while larger text feels closer and more intimate when it can freely span across the entire screen. Text in front of a character's field of view feels assuring and natural, while text behind a character feels suspicious and dishonest. Like the film examples, I've barely scratched the surface of the different ways cinematography techniques and a few comic book techniques can be used to show your text, but I want to emphasize that these are techniques for how to show your text. The hardest part about writing visual novels will always be choosing what words to write, but I hope I've shown you it's easy to make those words look good. But Vimy, you might be asking, you've shown us why we should move images around the screen, but how do I move them as dynamically as you've shown? That seems hard. Is there an easier way to move images around the screen, let's say via the popular open source visual novel engine, RenPy? Well, I'm glad you asked. I just started a YouTube channel and I'm starting with some RenPy tutorials. And the one I released last night covers the RenPy Action Editor, which is an easy way to move characters, text, and the camera around the screen. Yes, shill. I used this to make King of the Cul-de-Sac as dynamic as I could. Romancing Flesh really emphasized the use of that. So I hope you check that out, as well as all my other various projects. I did not have the timer on this entire time. I think I've been talking too fast. How much time do I have for questions, Aji?
Oh, well, not that much. Like 2 minutes. 3?
Ooh, I timed that up really well.
Yeah. All right. Who has questions? Let me see what I let's see. Oh, chat is just very busy with your links.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of links.
Yeah. they're all like, I'm distracting everything else. Anyone have any questions going on here? Yes, the bot didn't kill the links because we fixed the bot. Okay, how important is defining your UI early for figuring out staging and text?
That depends on what you mean by UI. Early on when I was making King of the Cul-de-Sac, I had all the text at the bottom, and I realized that made things like, again, like how I showed in here, it just made things very static. So I had to quickly go back and change all the images into like word balloons to go around, and that ended up taking a huge amount of time. Versus Romancing Flesh, I literally did not worry about the UI. I just put text down. Did not worry about that until the end. So it kind of depends on what purpose the UI is. Oh, text user interface, that's what I mean. I mean, really, it's just important to know, like, this is an area where I shouldn't put things there. So I usually set that early on in production. I'll say like either there's a quick menu at the bottom or one on the upper right, and just make sure I never have things overlap on that. I'm looking through these now. Are there any specific tips for the cinematography and action scenes, especially if they're a regular part of the work? Again, it depends on how crazy you want to get. I think it would be really cool to use the old visual novel like whole screen effects. I remember seeing that with Fate Stay Night, where they'd have fights where it's just a whole screen effect. But instead, just move the text around that kind of follows along with that action. So if you were to have like a sword slice, have the text follow that sword slice. If you're going to have somebody's head cut off, have like the text right there, have the lower half of it like. So it's just kind of however you want to use it. Just do cool stuff and people will think it's awesome. Question, do you have any advice about when moving sprites to not have it feeling puppet-like? When I try, I feel like static sprites are way more convincing when they glide around without walking. Yeah, I use Live2D or other third-party animation software. When you're doing that sort of stuff in an engine, when you do programmatic animation in an engine like that, you're going to end up with programming animation or programmer animation. Find a third-party software that integrates well with whatever you're building stuff in. Unity has a whole bunch of tools that lets you make more organic movement there. If you do have like little actions though, like whenever I have the camera moving around, I never use linear stuff. I always try to find some sort of ease. RenPy has a lot of those settings that you can set right in there. But one little trick I do like using though is if I have something suddenly moving from one side to another, I don't have it just stop there. I have it hyperextend. So you're actually moving from here to a little bit further than where you want it. and then you just have another little action just to move it back. It just gives it like a little like shaking into the spot there.
May I Pete, that's called overshooting. If you want to study it in animation terms, that's called overshooting. Look it up, learn from it. That's amazing. Yes. Thank you, Vimi, for teaching them about animation. Learn animation stuff. That's great. Yes. Vimi, go.
Maxie, this is like the third time I've described something and then you've actually given like the term for what it is because I don't know the words for it.
Well, all right, we've all learned that word and we're at time. So thank you so much for this. And there's a lot more questions in the chat, so you can kind of handle them in there.
All right.
Meanwhile, I believe Tabby is up for their talk. So you can take screen sharing and everything you need to do to set up.